Hi, everybody. I almost feel like I should be singing, although nobody would want that. So anyway, I'm Allison Schiff. I'm one of the editors with Ad Exchanger, and we're here to talk about measurement. I mean, if you're not measuring, you're not marketing. I think everyone in the audience could really agree with that. But it's difficult to be really smart about it. But luckily, we have a bit of a brain trust here to talk about measurement. So I'll just quickly do some introductions. First off, we have Patrick McCarthy. He's the SVP. Yes, he is the SVP and global head of marketing at Citi FinTech, which is kind of the innovation unit within Citi. And a fun fact about Patrick is that he has 87 first cousins. 87. That is correct.
And what was the story there, too? You said you had, on your mom's side, 11 siblings?
My dad has 11 brothers and sisters. My mom has 7.
That is excellent.
Yeah. Small little Irish Catholic family.
That's out of control. We have Michael Brooks. He's the SVP of revenue at WeatherBug. No one cheered for me. A hyper-local weather app owned by Ground Truth. And Mike has seen all 7 wonders of the world, which is fairly impressive. And over there, we have Steve Look, who is the global head of MarTech at The Economist. No, come on, guys.
I've got no fans.
Let's bring it in for Steve.
I've got no fans in the audience, so that's totally fine. Not yet, anyway.
So just imagine Steve with blonde hair down to his shoulders, because that's what he looked like in high school. And he appears briefly in the movie Hackers with Angelina Jolie. The director liked his look, so he brought him over to be in some of those scenes, which were filmed at his high school in New York City, which is pretty cool.
That's a really good fun fact.
Yeah. So let's start out. It's a little high level, but I think this is a good question. So what are the outcomes that you're measuring, and how do you figure out which metrics are the ones that really make sense, so that you're tying measurement directly to outcomes? Mike, since I'm looking at you.
Yeah, so I think my role, I'm new to the role, so I've been the SVP of revenue at WeatherBug for about 3.5 months now. And when I came in, I had this idea of like the North Star metric, like revenue is the one thing that matters. One of the things I realized is that's kind of a fool's errand to go after that one single thing. And I want to give a shout out actually to Stu Lovejoy, who's in the crowd today, who I was talking about this panel, and he was like, you have to check out this Reforge article. And this Reforge article talks about the difference between an input metric and an output metric. So an output metric is something that's often very like a lagging variable, like something you can't necessarily control in real time. And for me, that was revenue. But when we look at revenue at WeatherBug, that we kind of break that down into 3 different smaller input metrics that we tackle as individual challenges. So for us, we look at number of daily active users, we look at impressions per daily active user, and then we look at the eCPMs, because we're 100% monetized by advertising. Mm-hmm. So we kind of break it down from yes, at the end of the day, revenue is what's important, but if something goes wrong there, there's really nothing you can do to fix that. You have to fix one of the components. So when I get 3 numbers every day in an email, and those are the 3 that all come into the equation for revenue for us.
Excellent. Is it a similar story at Citi FinTech?
Yeah, I think we, in Citi FinTech, as you said, we're a small group within the larger Citibank universe, and we are focused almost exclusively on mobile. And for a long time, that was mobile engagement. So how do we engage our current user base, our existing customer base, on some of the new cool features we were deploying within Citi FinTech? And about a year ago, that changed, and we started focusing on acquisition through the mobile device. So looking at the full funnel and how do we acquire users nationwide through our mobile app. So we look at a whole host of engagement metrics, either feature-based or download to acquisition, to how do we bring them fully through the funnel and possibly open a checking account with us. Mm-hmm.
And what about for a classic publisher? Is it different?
I think for us, because we are a content company, and our content is known as being a little bit dense sometimes and hard to get through.
So is Ad Exchanger.
With amazing analysis, right? And so a lot of the metrics that we look at are engagement and also really time spent on per article, and whether or not people are finishing a particular piece, or how far they're getting, or if they're coming back and looking at things a little bit later. Of course, the traditional, let's say the base metrics that we're all concerned about with installs and engagement in general are important. We're trying to get closer to the concept of understanding how relevant a particular feature is, or how relevant a particular story is, or even how well people are utilizing a certain part of the app.
And I actually had a follow-up there. One of the things that I've been dealing with WeatherBug is we're a very small group. Like there's 35 of us, 25 are engineers. So when it comes to a lot of the metrics that we're going to talk about today, there's really like 2, maybe 3 people that look at them, especially in the growth world. And I think that that's interesting to frame what we're talking about. So for me, like I'm always balling on a budget. I'm trying to look as efficiently as I can because revenue and like growth is part of my job, but it's not the whole thing. But I would love to hear from you guys too, like what is the structure of your teams and what does that look like?
Yeah, so within our team at City FinTech, we actually, when we started, we made an effort to have actual product marketers sitting in the scrums every day. That was a change from how City had normally done things, where we were functional experts, either in above the line, below the line, or media. And that doesn't really work if you're working in Agile within an innovation team, where the product is expecting you to be coming in, writing, giving you requirements for what you're looking at from a marketing perspective. So we took a concerted effort to put our marketers in the scrums and work alongside the product owners with the new features that we were deploying.
On our side, I think we just went through a fairly large reorg where we brought all the revenue lines together under a single publisher team. And a lot of the thinking behind that and the reasoning behind that was to be able to understand that the concept of understanding a customer and what they would want, it wasn't just gated behind a particular person or team or function. And so, we've got agile teams when it comes to actual software dev, and we have a marketer in there, and we've got a product owner in there. But we have these larger, more holistic kind of steering groups. And in these steering groups, they're a lot more interactive and collaborative, even than a stand-up, let's say, where it is an idea generation kind of experience, or even taking anecdotal experience from someone, is an important point of understanding, or even creating another conversation about saying, yeah, actually, I heard that too, or maybe we can delve into the actual analytics to see if that's proven out, as to what somebody's actually told us. So we're trying to go back a little bit in the story piece of things.
Yeah.
And a little bit of, to what, was going on in the keynote was, we've got some of the data that exists there, but trying to do better to understand what it means.
Cool.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the concept of loyalty and how you guys define that.
Yeah.
And how you measure it. And Mike, I remember you mentioned something off stage which I thought was interesting, which is that there's really no concept of loyalty in your category, because it's quite easy for somebody to just hop over and check their weather anywhere else. And so it's super important to focus on innovation and product. But then how does measurement come in, and how are you thinking about the concept of loyalty, retention?
That's tough. Like we are in an argument right now where we're looking at one set of data and defining loyalty and retention a certain way, and then from attribution and analytics data where we have a different number. I think one of the interesting pieces, like we had talked about off stage, was like all of you could switch to WeatherBug, and I strongly suggest it, by the time that this talk is over, right? If you talk about some of your businesses, subscription businesses, banking, like. It's a lot stickier. So for us, we have to continue to innovate on products. And a lot of that is when we release something, seeing how we can build usage and just kind of getting customers used to doing something on a daily basis. For us, we're very daily app. Our daily active to monthly active ratio is very high, as you can expect in the weather category. So for us, it's when we launch something new, it's kind of stewarding people through the process to, one, get them to engage with a new technology that we've adapted, but two, were we right in our hypotheses as to what we expect the people to do, and then kind of work from there on, one, how do we get more people into it to get a good sample size, but two, if it's a shitty idea, do we can it?
Yeah, I think that customer feedback was important for us as well. in City FinTech and defining loyalty. When we first started, we had these big ideas that we were going to revolutionize banking by, you're going to drive by and scan a house and then we'll show you a mortgage. And we actually started talking to customers every week. And this is a team that sits within my boss's world, Linda Duncombe. And customers really said, you want me to be loyal, make it simple, make it easy, and make it fast. And then I can get on with what I really want to do in life. And I think that is really, a revolutionary thought within FinTech is actually making it simpler for the customer rather than creating all these tools that really complicate things.
Well, and it's also, it's humbling. You have to be humble and realize that people are not going to spend their entire lives in any of your offerings, but you want them to spend as much time as possible and for it to be valuable.
Yeah.
What about from your perspective?
I wish we could say that we've solved it, but I'm
Me too.
right?
Yeah.
And so what you're saying about there being a bit of a struggle or fight, the kind of thing, there's almost a philosophical battle going on, internally as to, is it enough that from a subscription business, we talk about things like churn and we talk about things like, how many people do we win back every week and whatnot. That's an important piece of it, but it still leaves out the part where we're listening to people and to what they're actually telling us. And even if they do, tell us certain things, is there a metric by which we can take this kind of qualitative information and make it quantitative and then sort of, judge it and slice it up somehow? So we're moving towards, or I'll say the camp that I'm in, is about looking at a kind of a customer experience scoring kind of mechanism that goes beyond something just like NPS, but really goes and understands a little bit more about what people really care about today or how they're utilizing things. I think what you're saying about, kind of just make this easier for me is a really big part of it. Because our first attempt at making a news app was what we call the Glass Magazine now. And it was almost a section for section, page for page replication of what the magazine actually looked like. And people actually didn't want that. And that's not exactly the most sort of mobile friendly.
Was that smartphone and tablet when you released that? Because that seems like a very tablet, like early tablet story.
It was both.
Okay.
And it was better on tablet for sure. So you can imagine how sort of painful it was, on the phone when you're like scrolling through an index and stuff like that, and you had to go back and forward. We've got this. We've got a new app that's I'm totally not selling this right now, but it's a soft launch, mostly to get user feedback and refine it before it really gets marketed at all. And it's a very, very different kind of thing. Our product owner will probably kill me for saying that it's kind of like The Economist meets Tinder. But it's very swipey, and it's very, yes or no.
Can we get a little bit more detail on The Economist meets Tinder?
Get some more detail. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And more pics.
I just wonder what that is. Okay. Interesting. Well, changing gears slightly, what is something that you don't measure? Like, are there metrics that just need to be retired? They just don't tell you anything. Maybe for some reason, they stick around. People keep including them in reporting, but you don't care about them anymore. They're just had their time.
I mean, we're just getting metrics in City that we really need, and so we're in sort of phase one, and that's really because our app, until about a year ago, was a servicing channel. So we acquired you through one of our traditional channels, and then you came into our app where we started digitizing services. And so we've just turned that on its head and opened it up to prospects, and we've been using Google's Universal App Campaign as sort of an initial test of how we can start looking at full funnel metrics. And it's really been totally revolutionary for how this bank thinks about acquiring customers and looking at what a cost per install is, what a cost per account is through the mobile app. So we haven't started retiring any yet. Okay. That'll come soon, but yeah, it's been an evolution for us within City.
I feel like the right answer here is CPI, because that's been like for the past 5 years, that's been what panels have been about, is CPI doesn't matter.
What's the controversial answer?
Yeah, and like that's true. However, again, we have the UA at WeatherBug is between me and my head of reporting, and it's neither of our full-time job, right? So I would love to say that for us, CPI is out the window. And when it comes to like how you evaluate CPI, it's like you have to know the proper range that you're going to be in to make sure things aren't fraudulent and look for red flags. But for us, like, we're kind of in a similar boat where I would love to come up here and say, like, there's these 20 things, so that was so 2017.
Right.
For us, it's not, everything has to come back to that revenue number, so if it doesn't directly correlate to there through any of the trees going in, we don't really pay as much attention. But I do look at CPI. It's how I evaluate partners, but it's also how I evaluate partners that I've worked with before. So I look at it as more of a trend over time rather than a way to evaluate somebody.
Even a CPI can tell a story, right? I think that it depends on how you weight different variables, but it gives you insight even if it's not the ultimate. Even if you're able to optimize on the account open, I think CPI can still tell you a story, and it's an important variable, even if it's not the best one to be looking at.
It's like a click to like an OG CPA campaign, right? It's part of the equation.
Yes.
But it's not the whole story. But when you have 2 people part-time looking at those numbers, you have to make you have to make some decisions based on it as high a level as you can.
Right. And I guess, I was saying at the very beginning, it's just about being smart about them. It's knowing how to evaluate them and how to use them. And like you were saying, no North Star metric, really.
Yeah.
Is the way to
And also
go.
how to identify fraud or things that, like we've been I think we've all been doing this a fair amount of time, and we understand what the expectations are from what our cost of acquisition should be. So if somebody comes to us with the opportunity that's like, 10% of that, questionable.
Right.
But still, I think all of them, you're right, can tell a story. And especially if you've been doing this as long as we have, it's a good thumbs up, thumbs down of how realistic is something going to be too.
Well, Steve, let's say a metric died tomorrow. You wouldn't go to its funeral. So which metric is that?
Allison's trying to get us on one.
Yeah, right. Unfortunately, I'm going to answer in the opposite way, where I think I don't actually feel that way about any particular metric right now. I just feel like we need to maybe reduce the importance or the weight of certain things, especially like in anything around installs. Like I was mentioning before, we've seen that if we have people who go through the app and don't finish stories, these tend to be low engagers, and then they disappear after a while, because it's just a bit too heavy for their usage. So, while an install is still important to us, but we start to look at some of the more derived metrics that combine 2 or 3 different areas together, where we understand if somebody has install but never uses it, then I can open a question up of how do we get those people back into the app, right? And that comes more to the question about retention, what we're talking about in engagement. So I want to take some of the stuff that we have and sort of matrix it a little bit more, so I have a more complete picture of how people are behaving, or what does this actually mean for us. I mean, it's sort of the age-old question and trying to answer insights, over these numbers. We have not solved it.
You'll all have jobs for many years to come.
Yeah, right. I like that install but mentality, right? Like if we go back to can CPI or that type of information be valuable, when you add on something else about that user, that compounds it and makes it a lot more interesting.
That context is so important, right?
Maybe that's what install has been missing all this time, is context.
We solved
context
it.
is king.
Yeah.
I think we just had a breakthrough.
Excellent work.
Nice. Well, let's talk a little bit about organic versus paid. So how do your organic efforts kind of impact your paid efforts and vice versa? Just because there is sometimes, I wouldn't call it a Chinese wall, but there is a lack of communication between maybe the performance and the brand, people at an organization. I know WeatherBug is quite small, so it's maybe not as much of an issue maybe as at a larger company.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually still a huge issue for us because, within FinTech we sit as part of a much larger organization. So my colleagues on the global team have initiatives that are going on that could be driving installs, or on the credit card team, on the engagement side and that sort of all gets wrapped up in organic. And so it's actually been interesting over the last year to partner with my different marketers from around the organization to really dive into how do we start thinking smarter about our organic installs and our organic activities and being able to parse them out. And we're frankly just starting that journey, and it's again a learning curve for us. What we've seen is that organic, when we launch new products, is doing a lot of the driving, and then paid sort of ramps up as you go through the product lifestyle or the feature lifestyle. But again, early days, and we're working with our partners to better understand that.
Right. Either one of you?
You go
Steve?
first.
Okay. I mentioned a reorg earlier, and part of that reorg is another one of these pieces is to actually drive editorial closer to the marketers. Because as a news organization, and particularly with The Economist loves the fact that we have independent journalism, and that goes all the way from separating all commercial teams from all of the editorial teams all the way up to the board. And so for years, it was difficult for the teams to work together because the organic was really handled by the editorial teams, and everything else that you spent money on to make money was on the commercial side. So now that things are together and people are working together more, there are some natural areas where folks are saying, I can't believe we haven't been working together, for all this time. We've been missing out on this opportunity. We've been doing a lot in paid marketing where we're definitely reaching this point of diminishing returns, right? Or maybe we've been reaching the point of diminishing returns probably for the last maybe year, 18 months. And it can be really tempting, or it can be an addiction, I think, to paid marketing, to be the thing that actually makes everything happen. When we're talking so much these days about the power of conversations, the power of relationships with our peoples, what role does this particular app actually have in that ecosystem? I think that that's a lot easier for our organic marketers to actually answer because they've been working from this position where they haven't had the benefit of blasting something right into somebody's face, right? If they could pay for it, kind of thing. So they've been thinking a lot more strategically around how do I make this more relevant to people. This is the kind of stuff that's happening. These kind of like larger steering groups that are happening. So again, we haven't solved it, but we do know that there's something like really valuable there. There's a gem in there that I think we're trying to dig out.
So when you put those teams together, what kind of things happen? Like the first thing that pops into my mind, something like, argument, but also like sponsored content. Like that's something that seems like when you put the business side and the editorial side together, when I was at AOL and we saw things like that with a HuffPost, it was a fantastic merging of those types of businesses. Is that the kind of thing you see when that happens, or maybe it's too early on?
Not sponsored content for the app, only because The Economist is so sort of, let's say, precious, for about, making sure that we don't have these kind of noticeable, kinds of partnerships, at least on our branded, kind of products. But the things that do come out of it, are probably healthy arguments that get people to re-examine something. I think recently one of the things that happened between was understanding exactly how the sort of advanced level of paid marketing we were doing, and how subtle we were in trying to optimize like little bits and pieces and that kind of thing, and then sort of opening that up to the organic team. They're like,
right.
Holy shit, this is insane. Like, how are you even doing this kind of stuff? That's really fun to learn. For that side of the team. So it's still a learning experience, I think. And it's helpful to have a data scientist in there also. Because as soon as you ask a question, they're like, I'm going to find that out right now. Yeah.
I'll tell you the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Just give me 3 weeks.
Excellent. Yeah, for us, look, I wish someone could tell me, here's exactly how your organics will interact with your paid. I've probably been lied to 1,000 times now about what that relationship is, and people seem to think they know. If you haven't figured out, it's mbrooks@weatherbug.com. Please hit me up. That relationship, we are very heavy on the organic side, people searching for weather, people in that moment, especially because of the loyalty. When you think about our competitors, like AccuWeather and Weather Channel, they're really good products, and their distribution's really good, and it's like hitting you in the face all the time, and they do a really good job of branding. For us, I think it's something where I lost the end of that train, but yeah, we'll move on. I had a really good point.
It was good.
Yeah.
I felt it.
I'll come back.
And just missed my end.
I feel your pain. I'm glad it didn't happen to me.
All good.
So a question for you
Yeah.
would be, Do you guys think about multi-touch attribution at all? Only because, there are still a lot of traditional things that people do, to just generate engagement or installs, like even direct mail.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the challenge you have in a matrixed organization like Citi, especially one where there's multiple different channels engaging people. And so it's not all, my world is all mobile, but other organizations, they're reaching out to people exactly via direct mail or through TV campaigns or, subway ads. And so it's something that, again, we think through, but it hasn't been fully fleshed out yet.
Okay.
So do you guys work with an MTA partner?
Metro Transit?
No, probably that too, but a multi-touch.
Oh, yeah. No, we haven't gone there yet, no.
Yeah, I feel like, especially for an organization like yours, that has to be like a CMO level thing, right? Like someone who really controls all of it. For us, not as big a use case. We don't spend a ton of money.
Right.
Yeah, I think, when I was at AOL and we had acquired Convertro and, my master's is in econometrics, so I'm a big fan of the idea that you can track everything. And if we can, we are in a really good place as an industry. Right now, I think one of the only groups who could actually pull it off would be whatever happens with AT&T and AppNexus. I'm very interested to see how, we've seen Google and AOL and a bunch of big companies acquire MTA partners. I think that the biggest hole there is TV attribution. And until someone can do that deterministically, and I think AT&T has a good shot at it, like they actually have a shot at it, that to me is going to be the difference on whether or not MTA is talked about in 2 years or not.
Mm-hmm.
We have multi-touch attribution across everything except mobile.
What?
I know it's just there's a huge gap, and I'll talk about that in a second. But like the point I wanted to kind of raise first was that when we did an incredible amount of work to make sure that everything was tagged up properly with Visual IQ, who we use,
It's a lot of work.
it is an
Crazy.
insane amount of work. Especially when you work with agencies who don't want to actually change, everything that they've already set up, and add new macros for everything else, et cetera, et cetera. But once all that was in, and we started to look at the results that were coming out of multi-touch, nobody believed it.
Really?
And I don't, and I work with our chief customer journey officer a lot on this, right? And we sort of fight the good fight of changing philosophies, internally. There's still so much of this almost obsession around last click.
Yeah.
And sort of, it's not about blaming anybody around it. It's just that the freaking industry has been built around it for decades at this point, and then to change that entire thing, and then sort of have data science directly in there under making algorithmic decisions as to exactly what matters and what doesn't, or how much it does. It can be really hard for people to just really digest. Especially when if you were looking at PPC and it's like, oh great, my CPA, is like £9, and then you actually look at, attribution, it's like it's actually 120. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Is that like some of the beef that was created when you guys started looking at MTA? Like that was the kind of thing where people were sure that like, oh no, my search is so efficient, and then actually there's all this other stuff on top that's.
It definitely it made certain channels actually, they were actually performing better, right, than they seemed, and vice versa, and that kind of thing.
What kind of channels were surprising to you as to like, wow, I didn't think that was
display.
as important? Really?
Display, as it turns out, for us was performing extremely well, because the amount of retargeting that was actually happening from a display perspective, and the amount of money that we were spending on it, was creating a level of brand awareness that was having a halo effect on everything else that was happening.
Yeah.
And it's just a really hard thing to kind of look at, especially when we're in this age where I think we're all like, the banner ad is dead, and nobody cares about it. Maybe nobody cares to click on it, but we still see it in some way, in all the things that we do and things that exist. But it kind of comes down to whether or not you trust it. And if I'm a real technology and data person, I have to kind of trust it. right? Even if it is wrong,
Yeah.
and not exactly the same things. But I want to trust it to be able to move the industry forward and move what we're doing forward. But we don't see mobile at all. But I should say it's a separate, sort of tube right now of information. So we're looking at these things across from each other, which is not the best thing, but we are working on stitching this together.
And is that a technical thing? Is it that
It's
Visual
a
IP is not
technical
playing
thing. Previous to the reorg, it was an organizational
Yeah.
thing,
I think that's why multi-touch is great, but in an organization where you have siloed marketing teams, each
Yeah.
doing their own thing, it's hard to bring everyone together. And
Totally.
fintechs tried to do that in the mobile container, which is a little bit easier for us at least, because there's less teams focused on that. Whereas within the organization, there's 7 different marketing campaigns happening from 7 different teams at any time.
Yeah.
And so multi-touch is something that we haven't really come together yet.
Yeah, on the mobile side, we don't even have the same level or same quality of a tune implementation in each app that we have. Yeah. One app has like 5 events that it's tracking. Another one that doesn't get much traffic is tracking everything you could imagine, which is where we actually want to get. But there's a lot of this kind of housekeeping that needs to happen, on that side that it takes time and
Tech dependencies. I mean,
Yeah.
I think a lot of
Woof.
All right, well, we have about a minute and a half left. So sort of quickly, I want you to drop a piece of wisdom on the crowd, something that they can take home with them and make actionable like tomorrow.
Yeah, I think for us, the game changer has been Google's Universal App Campaign, which we just started, and that's allowing us to get metrics that we never and use machine learning to reach people that we were never able to reach before. In addition, it's just the journey we've undergone. I think, for a large organization, a year ago, we didn't know where a single one of our 2 million downloads came from. And I used to say that, it could have been a single teller on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan who was just out there handing out flyers. We had no idea. And so it's really hard as a marketer to show value from any type of marketing activity if you don't know sort of where it's going. And so I think, it's making sure you have the right marketing tech and the right partners that allow you to sort of see full funnel and get those results.
For me, I think it would be kind of questioning what that North Star metric is, like we talked about a little bit earlier. If you have a problem and you're having trouble solving it, breaking that down into smaller solvable problems has been the difference at least for WeatherBug, and it's been going very well. So kind of breaking down those big esoteric ideas into things you can actually do.
Manageable.
Yeah,
Right.
and then you can move forward.
I think from my
Bring us home.
perspective,
Sorry? Bring us home.
Speaking as a technologist first, because I think I'm more of a technologist marketer, rather than the other way around, is question the very quality of the work that's actually going into the apps that you're working with, and the fact is that my role is in sitting between and bridging the gap between marketers and technologists. And there is great knowledge, but there are also great gaps that exist on both sides. And it requires more people to actually question exactly what's going on. Don't accept the limitations that exist right now. Go and question and challenge, and people will listen.
That's inspiring. Ask questions and don't accept the status quo. Well, Patrick, Mike, Steve, thank you so much.
Thanks, Alice.
Conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
great.
friends.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, marketers.